Welcome to this lovely interview discussion we have with three members of the LGBT network. Thank you so much, guys, for coming along and agreeing to chat with me. So we're going to be chatting basically just about LGBT experiences within the grad scheme, but also in the NHS as a whole. Just talking about kind of normalizing those experiences and realizing what more that can be done, really. So if I could just go around, get you guys to introduce yourselves. So Alex, if you want to go first.
Thanks, Ellie. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm on the September 2022 cohort. I'm a health informatics trainee, currently on placement at the Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently supporting on the LGBTQIA+ subgroup for the Graduate Management Training Scheme, and I'm also the co-chair of the LGBTQ+ network at my placement at the Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB.
Lovely, thank you. Andre?
Hi, thanks Ellie, and thanks for having us. So my name's Andre. I'm also on the September 22 cohort on general management, currently placed at Northampton General Hospital, which is really exciting. I used to work there, but we'll tell that a bit later. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm also working quite closely with the same working group, which is really, really exciting to talk about stuff like this, and also helping out on the newsletter stuff as well. So that's really exciting.
And Lauren?
My name's Lauren. I'm currently with Mid Cheshire Hospitals. I'm actually on the September 2021 intake, so a little bit different there. And I'm on the HR scheme. And again, I'm part of the same subgroup. So really excited to get to talk about what we've been doing with that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. So this is going to kind of just be more of a discussion. I'll kind of bring up just a few points that you might have opinions about or you want to share particular stories about, and then we can just go from there, really. So our first kind of point of interest is kind of one of the kind of more obvious things, but a lot of people won't consider it actually that important. Coming out stories, sharing those. Obviously, it's sharing as much as you like, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you're not comfortable with, is absolutely fine. But yeah, just what were your experiences around that, and how did they kind of shape your, I guess, your feelings of identity?
Who wants to go first? Alex, let's nominate you.
I went first last time, but okay. So I came out as gay when I was 16, which was the first year of sixth form for me. I probably knew I was gay from more or less the beginning of secondary school. So I was a few years before then, but I just wasn't comfortable during those earlier teen years to come out. Initially, I came out to my kind of immediate family, so my parents and my two brothers, and also my closest friends. And I kind of just left it there for a while, to be honest. I wasn't really open during sixth form in terms of like people generally at school knew that I was gay. And then I would say in university, I became much more kind of open in a more sort of visible sense in terms of being in LGBTQ networks, working with an LGBTQ charity just like us, which does school talks. And yeah, and really I'd say for me, coming out was more one step in a process rather than a sort of momentous life-changing event. I think sometimes it's presented as being like that, but it wasn't so much for me. And it is a very difficult process, I think, to go through, to kind of work yourself up to doing it. And I think you feel quite weird after you've done it, especially if you spend, like I had spent a long time hiding yourself and your identity. It takes a long time to kind of get used to it. So yeah, it was a very a kind of difficult experience, but one that you kind of have to go through, I found, for me, to then get all the great things that come later on from sort of authentically and openly being yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. Feel free just to add on to anything that Alex has said, guys.
I'll go in. Or do you want to go, Lauren? It's up to you.
No, sorry. The lady at the door of the office will maybe cut that bit out.
Okay, so broadly similar. So I guess I always knew that I was gay. But then I guess you always have girlfriends and stuff at school, and it was just quite hilarious because I always knew, but I don't know. And to be honest with you, reflecting back, I don't think many people were that shocked when I did come out. I didn't come out until Freshers Week at uni. And I remember before I went to uni, I said, oh, I'm finally just going to like say it because it's just been a bit like, it didn't stress me out necessarily. I was always quite comfortable with myself. It just became this like unsaid thing, and it just became more awkward the longer I like left it. But the way I came out, we were obviously you meet loads of new friends during freshers, and someone just really openly asked me, and I was a bit drunk, and I just kind of panicked, and I was just said yes, and it was really awkward, but nothing changed. I didn't feel any different. I wasn't acting any different, so that was really nice. No one treated me any differently. I've never been one to kind of join groups that kind of supported that community really. I just was never interested in it. I would never have done any of these. I guess that's just my kind of values. I just never thought that that was important, which is interesting considering a job that I then did later on. But coming out's funny, isn't it? Because you don't do it just once. It's like you do it with every person you meet or whatever in different ways, and so it becomes quite a minimal thing. And I also think it's interesting. There are times where I like won't say it, or it just won't kind of come out, I guess, for whatever reason. And sometimes I don't even know what that is. You just don't feel that comfortable with people. And I guess in some ways you don't need to, because it's not, it isn't like a big defining piece of my identity, I suppose. It's just something that I am, and other people are, and it is what it is. So yeah, I guess it wasn't particularly groundbreaking how it happened, but I'm really glad. And I guess as a whole, I do feel more comfortable just kind of being myself, and it isn't this unsaid thing. And most people actually don't really care. So it's quite nice, I think.
I think with me, it was similar, sort of having that sort of when do you say something and when do you not say something. I was a bit different in terms of when I actually came out. I think I was probably about 13, almost 10 years ago, bang on actually at the moment. And I saw the word bisexual. I was like, oh, that's me. But like, there wasn't like any real thought process before it. I just saw the word, and I was like, oh yeah, that's it. That's me. And it was very simple in that sense. I think I first came out to my parents and then to nobody else for a really, really long time. And I kind of preferred it that way. I guess I'm quite quiet about these sort of things. It's just sort of like whatever happens, happens. I've done LGBT stuff with my previous job before now. But in terms of everything else, I've just always had that very quiet, like, if it comes up, it comes up. I'll be open about it. But if you don't ask me, it's probably not coming out of my mouth, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely fair enough. How was it when you kind of joined into the NHS? Because I feel like at university, it's very, I don't know, in most places, I would hope it's a lot more accepting, and you're surrounded by people your own age. And then it's kind of like you enter that world of work on the grad scheme. For most of us, it is like our first experience of full-time work. And suddenly you're surrounded by so many different people, different ages, generations, different kind of ideas. And would you say that was liberating in a way, or has it felt more restricting?
I think in my first few weeks, there was a girl at my trust who had like a lesbian lanyard on, and I was like, oh, actually, that's all right. Like, this isn't the only, like, you're not massively alienated. The world is full of LGBT plus people everywhere you go. Some of them are more quiet about it than others, but it was quite nice to see her, because I was like, oh yeah, there's somebody else here. That you are part of the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is as much a part of it as you are. So I think that was really reassuring to me in my first few weeks.
Yeah, and I think as well, being LGBTQ plus, it's a bit funny, isn't it? Because as an example, racism and that sort of discrimination is probably more prevalent everywhere, mainly for the fact that that can be visible, right? But you can't look at somebody necessarily and say, oh, that's you, and therefore that's what you are. It has to come out of more of a conversational piece with people and feeling comfortable, etc. So I think my trust in particular, so I worked there before and I was the EDI lead for the trust, so there was a lot of work that I did on kind of building those spaces for people to have the conversations to feel comfortable. There's still a lot of work to go, I think. As an example, we have a disability equality standard, we've got a race equality standard, we don't have one for LGBTQ+. There are a couple of questions in the staff survey, but arguably it doesn't have the right focus that it should. And in some ways, it's difficult, isn't it? Because when you're at work, it might not necessarily be appropriate to talk about your sexuality constantly and whatever and this and that, but actually that's who people are. That's bringing their whole self to work, which is really fundamental to how good or not you are at kind of what you do. So I think there's a lot more to be done in the NHS, mainly just the fact that I think it's a relatively new topic that people are talking about, particularly with like transgender issues as an example, because we're just not built for that, because we're just not at the moment. So we need to be definitely putting a lot of focus on it.
Yeah, for me, this is my first full-time job post uni. So I don't have loads to compare kind of the NHS against other work environments beyond where I've worked part-time. But what I would say that I really like about the NHS is they do make a real effort to kind of visibly show their support for the LGBTQ community, like for example through rainbow lanyards and rainbow badges. Something that was really kind of meaningful for me was at the start of this scheme, all the new trainees here in the Hampshire and Isle of Wight system, we all had a meeting with the EDI leads, and it was really just 1 hour, and they just kind of gave us time just to talk about ourselves and our own experiences around kind of EDI, and just have it as a safe space to really open up. And I think to have that right in sort of my first month on the scheme was just really helpful, and just made me feel like it was a sort of safe space at work. And even if not obviously the NHS is enormous, so not everywhere and every kind of individual in the NHS is going to be kind of you know perfect in that respect, but to know that there are people such as, for example, in my ICB, the EDI teams, know that there are people who I can go to for support, and as a safe space is really kind of impactful to know.
Yeah, I guess it is just kind of normalizing it, isn't it? Because for where I work, you have so many people who have worked here for like 20, 30 years, and when they started out, it would have been completely different, the conversations that people were having. And I guess a lot of people would think that, having things like, so we've literally got a pride flag just flying outside at the entrance of the hospital right now. And like, we've got the rainbow lanyards, like all that classic stuff. And I guess it is kind of like, a lot of people might think that that's quite shallow in a way, because it's like, oh, you're just doing it to show that, it's not real work. It's just, I don't know, a lot of people will say that about like certain brands and things when they do that in Pride Month. But I suppose it does have an impact, because when it's helping to normalize it, I suppose. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the lanyard. So I made a pride crossing outside one of our entrances, which is really, really cool.
Oh, that's lovely.
But that we get loads of complaints about it from patients,
Really?
from staff, saying that, we don't want to be seeing that. That's one thing. But we also did some work with a local charity who I knew didn't like the lanyards and the badges, and I didn't really know why. And when we unpicked it, they apparently came into the trust and asked a bunch of staff what that lanyard or badge meant. And the majority of staff didn't know for whatever reason. They just liked the colours, or they just thought whatever.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of work on what the badge and stuff actually means. Does it mean you're an ally? Does it mean you are whatever? And there's also there was a problem during COVID, not a problem, but the NHS rainbow became a really big thing, didn't it? So then suddenly everyone wants that for that reason. So it's really tough to find that balance, I think.
Yeah, that is really interesting, actually. Like the idea that, you know, the staff are just kind of getting on with their days, and you know, a rainbow lanyard isn't exactly going to turn things around for them, is it? Definitely not. Would you say that there's anything that surprised you coming into the NHS, you know, either positive or negative? I mean, obviously, you know, being LGBT plus, it's not something that is visible or obvious, as you said. But are there any like conversations that you've had that surprised you, or things that have happened?
I've been quite surprised at the extent to which I've been very welcomed by my placement, specifically in terms of doing work around kind of LGBTQ plus issues. For example, the current chair of the network asked me if I'd like to co-chair the network, partly as, you know, being on the scheme, it gives me good management experience, but also because she was just very eager to have someone else there with a kind of fresh perspective. And yeah, I was really kind of quite sort of touched by that people were very, even though this is my first year at the NHS, they're not sort of dismissing me when I kind of talk about LGBTQ plus issues, and when I've sort of engaged with different people around the placement. I've been, you know, I've really been impressed so far by how willing people are to sort of discuss these things. For example, I had a meeting with the comms team about making some LGBTQ plus podcasts that we put on our sort of intranet for the organisation, and they were just really enthusiastic about it, really supportive, and that means a lot.
Yeah, that's really fantastic.
I'd agree. I think it's interesting when it needs I'm trying to put this in the right way. So it needs the right type of people to actually get it through the door and get it like for everyone's attention, because actually most people are just getting on with business as usual. So for a comms team, as an example, it might not be the top of their list. So it needs people to, you know, be really courageous and actually make it, be able to make the impact, which is why I love doing stuff like this, because actually I don't mind shouting, but actually there's a lot of people that are part of the community that don't, and they're the ones that we don't worry about, but they're the ones that we need to be looking after, because actually not everybody has it in them to, you know, be screaming and shouting all the time about Pride Month, which, you know, we're happy to do. But so that's why it's so important, and why it's so important to just really be courageous in what you're doing, because appreciating in an environment like the NHS, it's only really the past couple of years that any sort of like equality, diversity and inclusion stuff has actually been at the forefront. I think we've had health and well-being during COVID, and then I think now it's the EDI stuff, because people are starting to appreciate actually we're better at our jobs when we feel valued and we feel included. So I don't know if that's necessarily a surprise, but it's something that is nice, and is working, I think.
How about you, Lauren? Have you got anything that's surprised you at all?
I think I'm coming at it from quite a weird perspective, because I'm possibly one of those people who's not particularly a shouter a lot of the time. I think if it's something that it's like very sort of like moral sort of like thing, then yes, absolutely, I'm all for it. And you know, I mean, I'm here, aren't I? But I think in terms of like general sort of like, it's something I don't tend to mention. I am maybe the quieter ones from time to time. More than time to time. But I really like getting involved in these things. And I think it's giving other people the courage to be here and say things like that. Because like I was absolutely nervous about today, but I kind of thought to myself, you know, if I don't do it, then that's one less person sort of in a group of people who are encouraging other people to be comfortable with it and confident with it. So that's always been kind of quite a big thing for me in terms of like, we work together as a community for that.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think, you know, it's not just the responsibility of people who are in the LGBT plus community, you know, it's for everyone, especially on the grad scheme. We're also young coming into it. I think a lot of people kind of see us as representation of our generation a lot of the time. I know I'm especially, I'm one of the youngest here in my department, and most people I know are a lot older than me. And so when we talk about things like that, I do feel I have to represent that side. And I think you have to, really. It shouldn't just be down to people who are LGBT plus and who are open about it. It's a responsibility for everyone to make sure that these things are discussed. So I suppose, what do you think is good about what the grad scheme is doing so far to support EDI? I mean, obviously we have these working groups, we have the LGBT plus group, we also have the EDI network as a whole. But do you think there's more that can be done from the Leadership Academy?
Big question.
Yeah, sorry, it's quite a strong question. Completely fine if not, obviously.
I think something which is we're starting to do and we can progress more on is to really have the Leadership Academy collaborating with the trainee networks and groups and subgroups, and doing a lot of these things like Pride Month and having it very trainee led, and kind of feeding in the sort of ideas and perspectives of trainees. So whether it's collaborating on kind of comms from the graduate scheme or organising live events and things like that, I think the Leadership Academy has been doing things like that already, and I think that's the thing where we could do even more. Just collaborating together and organising things, because I think we have lots of ideas as trainees for what to do. We don't necessarily always have the resources or the connections to do them, certainly at a sort of national scale. So that would be something that I think we can work on more.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, to be honest, it's a logistical nightmare, isn't it, for the scheme, because we're so disparate. We're literally across the country, all in different organisations. So it is a nightmare. But I think you're right. I think, and actually, I think they do give us the space to do this. I mean, a lot of it is in our own time. So I guess that's one thing that we could look at, to see if there could be some sort of protected time, etc., to actually do this stuff. But I do think that the trainee-led focus is really helpful. So yeah, so I'm broadly happy actually with the scheme. I think it'd be really fun to get to do things like in person. I think that'd be really nice. I mean, just to be able to get a group together in X place in the middle, that we could all actually meet and get together, and if that could be facilitated, then that would be amazing. That would probably be the only thing that is missing for me, I think.
Yeah, that's true actually, isn't it? Because we've got all these working groups, but you never actually meet anyone in real life, because obviously we have our trips to Leeds, but that is within our own cohorts, within our own years. Yeah, it would be really nice to have something where, like, if you're a member of a working group, you can all come together and have that like a big trainee voice kind of meet up. I think that's really good. How about you, Lauren? Did you have anything to add to that?
There's a wide range of experiences across the scheme. People have, some people have really good, really inclusive experiences. Some people, like maybe at Trust, where there's maybe like a little bit of work that needs to be done and that kind of thing. And I think it's really interesting from a scheme perspective to try and understand how all these different places are different. There's different culture in every team, and within every trust, you might have an HR trainee and a GM trainee and an HI trainee. So you've got that huge range of people. And I think sort of collating all those different experiences together is really interesting and really important to hear that sort of feedback.
Yeah, that's really true. And everyone's doing such different roles, aren't they? Like you can't compare any one grad's experience to another, because it is so wildly different. And I think that is quite scary kind of going into it, isn't it? You don't know what you're going to get. And I think what comes with that roles is kind of a different level of control as well. So like what you were saying, Andre, about being able to do that crossing and painting that, like that's so much fun, that's such a good thing to do. But a lot of people, say in operational roles or in different trusts, won't have the access to be doing that kind of thing. And we kind of have to take what we can get, I suppose. But it's about having that influence, isn't it? Like how much influence can you exert to try and make a change? Would you say are all three of you in strategic roles currently?
I'm in ops.
I'd say I am.
HR's a bit weird.
Yeah, true.
I'm more operational than I am strategic, but HR's a bit.
Yeah, because I think about my role, which is operational down in the southwest, and yeah, it's quite difficult to think about like how you can do what you can do to support EDI more, I suppose, just because it's not really talked about very much down here anyway. People just kind of carry on with things. I don't know if you're in a more strategic placement, do you have more control over that kind of thing because you can kind of get a wider look at the trust as a whole. I'm not sure.
I guess so. I think it depends on what placement. So my role is operational, but actually it's quite, I don't manage a service or anything. So I still do see that view. I think it just depends. And sometimes you're really busy and sometimes you're a bit quieter. So you've got more time to do stuff like this. I think a lot of it also depends on who your placement managers are, as an example, how connected they are, because a lot of our connections are literally based on who kind of they know and who we're introduced to. So I think there's a bit of that. Yeah, don't know. It's a good question, actually. I haven't really thought about it.
And would you guys say that the LGBT plus network, having that with the grad scheme, has that really helped you in, you know, your journey with the graduate scheme so far?
Definitely for me, I think it offers really good management experiences, actually, organising these things for Pride Month, chairing meetings, doing kind of communications, and also just generally thinking about LGBTQ issues and generally, and this would apply to any kind of issue around EDI and inclusion. All of those, I think, are really fundamental skills. They'll map onto your competencies, and they're just important skills anyway to have as a leader in any job role. So I definitely think it's been one of the highlights of the scheme for me, not just in terms of that I enjoy doing it, but that I think it's developed me a lot in my management and leadership.
I think probably
fantastic.
Calling back to our question before as well, like if you're in an operational role, it gives you that option to do the sort of strategic stuff as well, because it gives you that platform to say, oh yeah, we've got a subgroup, we're organising something. I might not be able to do something at my trust or at my hospital, but I've got something that I can do here, there's something that I can work on here. So for example, you know, like making the communication stuff for the network, you know, we've got that sort of really different perspective from doing things directly at our placements. I also think it's quite nice just to have a chat sometimes as well. It gives us the option to sort of have a conversation, be like, okay, how are things going? What are things like for different people? Sort of like having those connections with other people as well. Because a lot of times when we meet up for other things, you know, like for EL and things like that, there's kind of like it's non-stop. It's quite a full-on day, and everyone's quite tired by the end of it. Whereas here we've got like that sort of section of time to be like, right, okay, what's on today? What have we got to discuss? And it just gives us a bit of time, I think.
Totally. I think the peer support element is really key, which is something I probably hadn't really appreciated, to be honest, because I think sometimes with these groups, you just like projects, let's do this, let's do that. But actually, it's quite nice just to meet people that you maybe haven't seen in a while or have never met, and just discuss experiences, because they're so varied, being in different places. So that's been really, really nice. Yeah, because I think sometimes you could try and do the kind of peer support stuff within your networks at your placement organization, but sometimes you don't necessarily want people to kind of take that away and kind of reflect on it. You just want to have a really like unbiased conversation, just talk to people that are like in a similar situation than you, and then just kind of leave it there. So I think that's been quite helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So what would you say to a grad then who is maybe thinking of joining the LGBT network? How would you promote it to them?
Yeah, just say join if they want to. I think it's quite simple. I think just everyone should just come with kind of an open mind, join for one session. If you don't like it, don't, you know, no one's forcing you. But I think just to know that it's there and there to support you if you need it is just the best thing. So
yeah, and joining's not a sort of formal like everything's changed because you joined the network. You can get involved as you want to. You can join in the respect that, say, we have a WhatsApp group, you could join that and not even come to the meetings if you didn't want to. It's just good to have that network there. So when you ever need them, or if there's anything that you're interested in working on or talking about, you know who to get in contact with and who to talk to.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Would you recommend the network for people who don't belong to the LGBT plus community? Is it something that you'd say, actually, you know, it may not be, the whole thing may not be for you, but actually we'll do these events which are focused around kind of building more awareness? Would you say it's more that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I don't know if we've had the conversation around kind of allyship and the members. We don't go around and ask everybody,
Yeah.
like, what do you know what I mean? It's really not like that. That's not something I would care about. And actually, there are lots of different ways to get involved in doing different things. So we're coming out with some training as soon as I've actually finished it. So that's really exciting, just so that people can learn a little bit more about it. And there'll be some kind of practical stuff, about kind of do's and don'ts around gender and pronouns, etc. Cool. So just really nothing like scary, but just to give people a bit of a helping hand. So that type of stuff is really easy to get involved with, and you don't necessarily need to come to all the meetings or whatever.
Yeah, my network at my ICB is, you know, they call it their LGBTQ plus and friends network. So they kind of promote bringing allies in quite strongly, and we do have a lot of allies in the network. I think it works really well, actually, because a lot of people in the network, although they're not in the LGBTQ community, it'll have a significant impact on their life in some way that might be very close to someone who is, or it's just something they've got a lot of work and experience in. Maybe they do a lot of work in EDI, are very passionate about that, and actually they can bring really interesting ideas and perspectives and kind of to the conversations, and also just as another sort of helping hand on any kind of projects and things that we're working on.
Yeah, it's important. What made me think of it was that I was having a chat with some people from the Women's Network the other week, and they were saying we need more men because actually we've got all these women joining these talks, and like a lot of this men need to hear. So yeah, it's quite interesting in that way, you know, because you want to get that word out, I suppose, but then also you don't want to kind of not sacrifice, but kind of change that safe space, I suppose. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you, guys. I think kind of rounding it off now, really. Would you say that there's anything else you'd like to add about your experiences within the NHS, what needs to be done, more generally?
I've got a few things, but someone else can go first.
I guess thinking more on like a national scale, perhaps.
Yeah. I'll go first. So I've touched on it a little bit. So it would be amazing if we had an equality standard for LGBTQ+, because I think there's so much data that we could capture about people's experiences, and they're going to be so variable across all the L's and the G and whatever. A gay person is going to have a really different experience to a transgender person at work, as an example. So, and I think it will really give people the kind of actions on how to fix it, because not everybody has all the answers, and nor should they necessarily. So I think that's really important. I think in terms of kind of the national and regional support specifically, so for the Midlands, as an example, all NHS organisations have to have an LGBTQ+ network. I don't actually know if that's the same outside of the Midlands, but little things like that are actually really powerful, because it, you know, it literally forces organisations to do that and create those spaces and actually start working on stuff. So that's really good. And I guess also investment in training, because I think a lot of the training that's available is pretty lackluster. And it's all just based on your mandatory training, isn't it, for EDI? And some of those principles, they are important, but actually it's much broader and it's much deeper than what you learn in, you know, 20 minutes on ESR or whatever you do it on. So that would be my suggestions.
Yeah, kind of making those more active changes. I think a lot of the time people think, oh, people aren't ready for that yet, we need to wait for them to be ready. But in reality, you kind of have to enforce that change, and then they have to change with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Humanizing the training just a little bit, because sometimes you do the ED&I training, you're like, okay, that's something, and there's just not really, like, I don't want to say like a heart to it, because, you know, training's not built to be super personal, but sometimes it's like it's some types of ED&I training, and I've looked at a lot of different ones. I've written some training courses and things like that. Sometimes I look at them and I'm like, it looks like you're talking about aliens. Like I don't understand how you've managed to take such a huge step back and put such a huge focus on this that it's completely like disconnected from the real world. So I just think just that little bit of focus on, okay, like this is training that everybody's going to see. How is it relevant to kind of the real world? Is it relevant to actual people?
Yeah, that's really true. I feel like a lot of people, especially when you start in the NHS, like this sheer amount of training you have to do, like for everything, it's just unreal. And you just switch off in the end, don't you? You're just clicking. Like, I remember we'd have those quizzes at the end. It would be like 5 questions. I would just tap anything, and then it would tell me the answers, and I just write them down, and then redo the quiz. Because it's just like, yeah. So it's making sure that that's actually, that training is engaging, and making sure that people are actually, engaging with it. Absolutely. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Alex?
Yeah, I really agree with what Lauren said about, I think, having those sort of personal aspects, sharing stories in sort of training generally is a really good thing to do and sort of do more of in the NHS. And I also agree about, I think LGBTQ kind of issues need to be, I think, we work on them, but it's not necessarily the same everywhere, and it's often sort of down to people volunteering their times within network to get stuff happening. So I think to really embed it in the NHS work, to kind of have sort of EDI groups that are working with networks, to have dedicated time for people to work within networks. I think that's very important, to not make it feel like a sort of optional voluntary thing, but actually a essential part of what the NHS does.
Yeah, absolutely, making it ingrained. Okay, well, thank you so much, guys. This has been really, really interesting. I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add, any last kind of comments or statements, just to say, like, to any grad who might be watching this, who perhaps wants to get more involved. I suppose it would just be to join the LGBT+ network.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, thank you to you, Ellie, as well, for listening to us waffle on for this time. We really appreciate it. It's been actually quite nice to talk about it. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but for me it has been.
I've really enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for organising it, Ellie, and I guess also to everyone else to check out the Pride special of the newsletter when it comes out.
Yes. Yeah, early June, it'll be out. Hopefully people are watching this through that, actually.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just doing more of those kinds of things, isn't it? Just to make it more normalized. But yeah, thank you so much, guys. It was really interesting. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.